Hi, I'm Professor Jeff Cunningham of Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. Our icon today is Jeffrey R. Immelt. He is the 9th chairman and CEO of General Electric in its 123-year history, the company whose roots go back to the inventor Thomas Edison. Jeff Immelt was appointed on September 7, 2001, and during his tenure he successfully dealt with extreme disruption in the world and inspired historic innovations in the company. Welcome, Jeff Immelt. Jeff, my first question was going to be, where do you take Andrea on vacation? But I was afraid you were going to say GE's 140 global branches. Looking back, when you became CEO in 2001, what have been the most unexpected hurdles?
So, Jeff, it's funny. It's been almost 14 years to the day, and we had the anniversary of 9/11 last week. So it always makes me thoughtful. I think the world, if I had to pick one, we'd come out of this time period of really geopolitical peacefulness. U.S. was the center of the economic world. We really hadn't seen a meaningful recession since 1990 and things like that. So I think the biggest surprise has just been the world has just been twisted from one of relative, I would say, benign growth to one of just high volatility, high geopolitical risk, things like that. And so in many ways, the environment today is nothing like what it was, like what I thought it would be when I became CEO.
I know you've talked about 9/11 and your experience, and if I'm not mistaken, you were on a trip to Seattle the day before 9/11.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you think back to that time, what kind of stresses were you and the company dealing with?
So I was in Seattle, so it was just an incredible moment. And again, I always start by saying, what the country went through was far worse than what the company went through or what I went through. But, we were big in the aviation business. We were big in the insurance business. We were owned a network at that time. So we really had, several of our businesses that got direct hit. So I would say, first and foremost, I thought about our employees and were they safe. Second, I worried about the country and were we under attack. And then we just started, unraveling the impact on particularly our aviation business. If you were in the commercial aviation business on 9/11 of 2001, you went through a major thrust because products were being used as weapons. We owned 1,200 aircraft. What happened to airlines was certainly at risk. And so we're really, picking our way through the various businesses we were in to try to determine, what changes we needed to make and how we would adjust.
When you got through that very difficult period, when did you start thinking about streamlining the company and the transformation that has taken place today?
So I would say as the world started to change, and you could see, I would say the financial service business, even pre the Lehman Brothers crisis, was getting more difficult. And I had a little bit of a sense that the company was more well constructed for kind of an American-centric economy, one that was maybe not quite as volatile. We really started thinking through the portfolio had to change. And the initial thrust was to make GE Capital actually smaller. So we sold our insurance business and things like that. And I think we've had this philosophy for about 10 years that we only wanted to be as broad as we were deep. So we looked at those businesses where we thought we had an essential competitive advantage as ultimately the businesses that GE should be in. So I thought about technology, globalization, installed base revenue, things like that as being our core competency. So we started eliminating businesses like plastics. Even before the crisis, we thought about whether or not NBC was a good fit for the company. And we wanted to make financial services at that time no more than a third of the company. The financial crisis kind of took care of that. So, but we had smaller financial services, more dispositions than acquisitions, and get deeper in core businesses like healthcare, aviation, energy. We really started that in 2004, and then it got impacted by the financial crisis for sure.
That's a very different philosophy than we want to be number one or number two in every business.
Yeah. Again, I think time changes. When you replace a famous person, you're always reminded of things that he said in the past. And I think what really makes leaders great, or what really made, let's say, my predecessor great, was that he really didn't care too much about history. He was always what was right for the moment. And so I think we think today what's right for now, not what was right 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So today, I think we live in a very global business. So I became CEO in 2001. We were 70% American. I joined GE in 1982. We were 80% in the US. Once we complete the Alstom acquisition, we'll be almost 70% outside the United States. So just the global footprint is so much different. Our vision has always been that GE is a technical leader, that the core of our competitive advantage had to be built around technology. I think we used to think that it was only about leadership, and that if you had good leaders, you could be in any business. We want to have good leaders, but we actually believe that this deep domain expertise is also critically important for the future. But you just can't, business has no shelf life. So you really can't be captivated by anything that's happened in the past. It's all about today and tomorrow in business. And so I've never worried so much about what it was like in the 1980s and 90s.
But you always have to arbitrage the difference between what Wall Street's excited about,
Sure.
what the world's excited about, and what you should be excited about. How challenging is that?
Look, Jeff, I learned something important the hard way, and I'll harken back to 9/11. So the markets, as you remember, were closed for that week, and then they reopened. And the day we reopened, our stock's down like 20% after 9/11. And our largest shareholder owned at that time 400 million shares, and they sold a big chunk of their holding and pushed the stock price down. And I called the people running the fund and said, guys, slow down a little bit, you're scaring people. And they said, well, we didn't realize that GE was really that big in the insurance industry. And I said, well, if you own 400 million shares and you didn't know we were big in the insurance business, that's your fault, not mine. And I think what you want to have in the investor base are people that kind of share your strategy transparently, that know, hey, we're in the jet engine business, or we're in the healthcare business. And I think increasingly, certainly after the financial crisis, it was hard to be both in the financial service industry and in the industrial business, right? So there just were fewer investors that were willing to go along for that ride. So I think where we are today, people say, hey, here's what I'm investing in. We still need to report quarterly earnings and annual earnings and things like that. But I think we have more people in the stock today that know why they've invested, aren't necessarily looking for a quick turnaround, but want to own it for a couple years, see us execute our strategy and hold us accountable for that. And I think that's ultimately what when you're a CEO, you're always going to have to work this short-term, long-term trade-off, but you want people in the stock because they know the strategy and they hold you accountable for your own expectations, not somebody else's.
Well, that relates to an announcement that I think you just made today, and I'll put it this way: if Olivia Newton-John were writing a song about GE, it would be "Let's Get Digital." What's going on with that?
Look, I think it's transformation. So I think the technology in the world has just changed dramatically. So a jet engine today is surrounded by, let's say, maybe 100 sensors. So when you fly back to Arizona, that flight is probably going to generate a terabyte of data. And it's going to be about emissions from the engine, fuel performance, wear of the blades. And the customers can now use this data to determine life of the engine, when it needs to be overhauled, how much it should cost, how to be more fuel efficient, and things like that. And we want to participate in that. So our thesis is that every industrial company also has to be a software company. Now, if you were in GE in the 1990s, appropriately so, we kind of said, look, we do hardware and finance. Somebody else does software. And we should separate those two, but that's not really where the world is today. So we kind of talk about being a digital industrial company, and we think that's really the future of where a company like GE has to be, and we're putting our money where our mouth is on that.
Yeah, I know that I don't think everyone knows that GE was voted best brand on Vine, the short video channel, best Fortune 500 brand on social media, Twitter, and Instagram. This has to have been something that started a while ago. How did GE get cool?
So I'm not sure. I would say two things. First of all, we've got the goods. You know, in other words, the stuff we do is essential to the economies around the world, essential to people. And I can go to any college campus and say, hey, do you want to be involved with the future of transportation, the future of flight, the future of healthcare? Do you want to get involved with that at the ground level? 22-year-olds would say, yeah, that sounds pretty neat to me. And then we also invest in great technology like analytics and industrial internet and things like that. But I think beyond that, we've got great creative people that work for GE, and we turn them loose on social media and allow them to create their own stories. One of the things I reviewed this morning is on National Geographic Channel. Ron Howard and Brian Glazer are doing a 6-episode story of technology and science that has world-class directors from Hollywood who are producing shows on the brain, the future of energy, and GE scientists are a part of that. So I think we're into the things that interest people, and we're willing to experiment in new ways of storytelling with the talent that we have inside the company. And I think that combination, I don't know if it makes us cool. I have a 28-year-old daughter. She might disagree with the notion that I could ever be cool. But it makes us relevant, which is probably even more important.
I have 2 daughters, and we don't only share the name, but the fact that neither of them think we're cool.
Exactly, yeah.
Let me take off on that thought about the brain. You had dinner not long ago with 4 brain scientists.
Mm-hmm.
You've also started a program with Roger Goodell of the NFL
Mm-hmm.
to combat brain injury. Most of us wouldn't have thought that GE would be in the center of those conversations because, like your earlier example, we really don't know where the company is in terms of the technology edge. Tell us about that.
So we've got a $20 billion healthcare business, and we're a big diagnostic company, so both imaging and biomarkers and things like that. And one of the things that's really great about GE or running GE is that you can look out over these big challenges, let's say, in the 21st century. And one of the big challenges is just the study of the brain. So it's the most understudied, kind of organ in the body. People know a fair amount about cancer. People know a fair amount about heart disease. But when you think about traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, things like that, we don't know that much about how disease in the brain really happens and how it can be treated. So we've launched a variety of different technologies, both on our imaging business, but also on, for instance, we do a biomarker that can light up amyloid plaque, which is one of the precursors to Alzheimer's, exactly, and ALS. We've got research on ALS. And then, so that's a piece of our science. And when we talk to some of the advanced people, that's what we talk about. And then we're always looking for other conveners around how to raise more money, how to raise more interest. And in the case of brain disease, it's really the U.S. military and the NFL. So you've got all these kids coming home that have had some form of traumatic brain injury, and the NFL, of course, is grappling with concussions and the after effects. So it allows us to raise more money, to raise more awareness, and to drive the science harder. But that's an example of a business that's really about the next generation of GE, like financial services was the last generation of GE, and one that we feel like we can compete very aggressively in.
How does this relate to the institution that you've developed here, the Global Research Center, which you fund at about $6 billion a year, which would, by the way, be a nice profit for any company?
Mm-hmm. I think about what we call the GE store. So we say, okay, what is at the core, what allows us to be in a company that is in the energy space, the oil and gas space, the healthcare space? And from your experience at Forbes, you know that conglomerates kind of go in and out of style, and you better have a thesis on why you have it. So we call it the GE store, which is really the foundation of why GE exists. Why can we be in the variety of different businesses? And one of the core elements of the store is science and technology. So we have one of the last companies that has an industrial lab. We push those technologies across the company. So the fact that we're in the aviation business helps our power generation business. The fact that we're in the healthcare business, we take imaging technology from healthcare, we put it in oil and gas to do pipeline inspection and things like that. So one of the core competencies of GE is really this technology that we drive across the company to make us successful. So I believe that that is a differentiator, and that's what creates a big moat for a company like ours.
Creates value.
Yeah.
You're a CEO, but you're also a portfolio manager and a capital allocator.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fellow in Omaha that claims to do the same thing. Who's got the tougher job, you or Warren Buffett?
Oh, look, I mean, I think that Buffett's always a guy I study. And what I've learned from Warren is he never follows a fad. His thesis, what he believes in, how he invests never changes. And I think, again, that is something I've learned from and try to do the same thing in my own context. There's a lot of people, Jeff, that have gotten fired thinking they're Warren Buffett, and I don't blame them.
Or went broke.
Or went broke, So what he does kind of works for him. He is a classic, really, as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, all he does is really allocate human resources and capital. So there's no global research center at Berkshire Hathaway. There's no brand building per se other than him, right? So we run our company a little bit differently. I mean, capital allocation is still important, but we invest $1 billion a year in training people. We have the 6th most valuable brand. We globalize as a big company together. We do technology together. So I think there's a lot to be learned. I mean, again, what I would say is the thing I admire the most about Warren is he never follows a fad. He doesn't pay more than 8 times EBITDA. He's very focused on certain kinds of industries, and I try to follow that vis-a-vis GE, is to stick to a very disciplined box of what makes a good GE business, what makes a good investment. But we also do things centrally that in Berkshire Hathaway would never be viewed as value added.
You mentioned brand. Unless someone is an analyst or has looked recently, they may not realize that the top 10 Fortune 500 includes Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and one 123-year-old industrial company. Do you see that as validation of your strategy, that you are in the top 10 with those companies?
First of all, I think it's what we want to aspire to be. In other words, we want to stay relevant today. The second thing I'd say is I'm blown away by companies like Google. Google's, I think, 12 years old. I'm completely impressed with what they've done in 12 years. But the third thing I'd say is, look, we matter. In other words, we're not going away. We're paranoid. We're investing. We're changing. We're relevant to our customers and the industries that we serve in. So I always think these, we don't want to be Microsoft. We don't want to be Google, but we're inspired by them. We want to be better because of them. So I always think that's just one of the great things about business. 15% of the S&P 500 market cap today were companies that didn't exist 10 years ago, the Facebooks of the world. So I think it makes our team inspired, hardworking, wanting to stay relevant, and that's how I look at it. But I want to be in the top 10 most valuable brands. It's not okay for me to say, oh gosh, we're too old. We've got to be number 15 or number 20. That's not acceptable as a thought for our company.
One day we'll look back, we'll call this the Immelt era, and we'll say he made it look easy. Was it? What were the hurdles in performing the streamlining, the changing, the portfolio switches that you've done?
I would say, look, I've done this now 14 years. It's a hard job. In other words, anybody that sits there and says they think these jobs are easy, these are hard jobs. You have to learn every day. I think what I love about our company and what I try to match myself is just resiliency. This sense that we're never as good as we want to be. We're never as good as we can be, and that no matter what happens, we can keep getting better. So I think what I would say we've accomplished is we've done all these changes in a very unforgiving, with almost no tailwind, right? So we've been able to change the portfolio, grow earnings, do things like that, and have had 3 recessions, political unrest and things like that. I was having lunch today with a political candidate, somebody that's running for president, and we don't think today as a company about government doing tax reform or immigration reform or great things. We are more worried about the government shutting down in 2 weeks. That's something that my predecessors didn't have to grapple with, right, in terms of where the world is. So in a very volatile world, we've stayed focused on, kind of what we thought we could be, accountable to, our customers, our investors, and each other. And I think that's made us a better company.
One thing that surprised me, delighted me, you recently announced your Alstom deal, which is a major grid and power transmission operation in France. But the fact that you got DOJ approval and European Commission approval, so my question is, how difficult was it, and is dealing with regulators actually a core skill for a major global company?
So the answer to the second question is yes. We are at a moment in time when businesses are suspect, large institutions are suspect. It's the most kind of anti-business government, not just in the U.S., but everywhere, that I've seen in 33 years in business. And so I think we thought we were right all the time. We thought this was a good deal for Europe, a good deal for the U.S., pro-customer. But the fact that we were just more nuanced, I think we were more flexible. We were more looking for ways to maybe get 80% of it right versus 100% of it right. And Jeff, 14 years ago, I could never have done that. I was too arrogant, right? I think after doing this for 10 years, you become more humble. You become a little bit more flexible, and you recognize that winning 80% of the time is still a win versus this need that you think you have to, if I don't get it completely my way, I'm going to walk. That's just not relevant in the world today, particularly in dealing with governments.
It goes back to your comment about capitalism and the ability, the requirement to be flexible.
Yeah.
So contrast that with what happened with Honeywell.
It's such a different, it was just such a different day. It was just so I would look back and say, Honeywell, Jack was right. We were right. So in other words, it wasn't an antitrust case, but nonetheless, we didn't have the right outcome. So, and again, nothing, he was a great CEO, but outcomes really matter. In the end, winning, getting things over the goal line, that's important. The fact that you had to compromise here and there, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's what you learn in terms of the world today. And I think it's something that I've learned having done this job for more than 10 years.
One of your signature achievements is what you've done in terms of networking in the manufacturing space. We're looking at a 1 trillion sensor world. I'm worried about what we do with all the data storage, but also Jim Clapper, of the Director of National Intelligence, said our problem isn't going to be data theft, but data manipulation. Are those opportunities for GE, and are they also concerns?
So I think, so let me take the good part. The good part is data is going to unlock whole new areas of productivity. It's going to make people more efficient. It's going to make machines more efficient. If we could save just the GE installed base of jet engines 1% on fuel, that's worth $3 or $4 billion to our airline customers every year. So that's a massive windfall that data can bring. Now, on the other side, if you said, name one of 3 or 4 enterprise risks for the company, cyber is at the top of that list. I personally run the cyber working group inside the company. We look at it both in terms of our enterprise, but also in terms of our products. And so we are really paranoid about an emerging world where products need to be hardened, products need to be safer, so does enterprise. So I would hate to say that the fear kept us from going after the massive upside that exists. I think what it really means is that people have to be expert on both. And we take cyber terror very, because it's not just theft, but it's manipulation, right? You had a car's brakes disabled remotely, a month ago or something like that. Look, we worry freakishly about things like that, as I think you have to be in this world.
I'd just like you to comment, if you will. You announced recently that a vice chairman was appointed, and I think the first female vice chair at General Electric. That follows in the kind of thinking that's been happening at places like IBM and Pepsi and so forth, where women are rising up into the most senior management positions. Quick outlook for GE as well as corporate America for the subject of diversity and people moving up to the top.
So my first diversity training in GE was in the mid-'80s. So I'm in almost my 30th year of being trained how to run a meritocracy, how to be open, how to encourage an open workplace. There's no excuse for people of my generation not to be open to, no matter where you came from, no matter what you've done. If you can bring it, if you've got merit, if you're winning, you're going to get promoted. And so we have a great pipeline of women. I always tell people, my dad is 88 years old. It's okay if sometimes he's not quite into diversity the way I am. If you're my age, there's no excuse. You have no excuse. You've been taught the right way to run the workplace so that the best people can get the right jobs and things like that. And look, the fact is that Beth Comstock, who is our first woman vice chairman, she's brought incredible value to the company through a multitude of different roles. And this is one where everybody in the company just says, hey, fantastic, that's great. Today we had two promotions to people running big GE businesses. Russell Stokes is an African American, Jamie Miller is a woman. There's nobody, I hope, I don't think it's totally, we're not there yet, but I don't think people in GE looked around and said, oh gosh, this was a diversity move. They looked at it and said, these are two awesome people that are going to be great GE leaders, and what a great thing for the company and for them.
In 2008, the Washington Post said that you were one of the world's best CEOs. 7 years later, are you even better?
You've never really led until you've been through like a really, really tail risk, flying close to the sun, right? So now, they don't love you when that's happening, right? In other words, when you're in the middle of the crisis, you don't understand you're getting better. And believe me, the people that are investing in you are a little bit hacked off, right? But there's no doubt in my mind, when I talk to other leaders, no matter where they're from, the fact that you've been through a crisis, and if you're a learner, which I hope I am, or which I think our company is, you get better. And so I'm 100 times, I always say this about looking at people. You never tell anything about anybody when things are good. You can only tell about people when it's like 15 minutes till midnight and it's crappy outside and there's horrible things happening. Then you can tell who's good and who's bad and who can make it and who can't. And I think in my own case, I've learned from all the things that have happened over time and just hopefully become better, try to become better.
So my last question. If you're truly as global as you say, when Elon Musk puts a rocket to Mars, will there be a GE representative on board?
So it's a great question. So I'm always very, very mindful of what guys like Elon are doing. I just think that one of the incredible aspects of the United States is this great venture creativity. So I don't know if there'll be a GE person on board, but I can tell you we have teams of people that are studying what he's doing to say, okay, should there be a GE control system? Should there be GE propulsion? Should there be a GE person? And whether it's Bezos or Elon or Elizabeth Holmes, or if I could go down the list of people, we're quite, I would say, intrigued by everything that's going on in the world around us. And how can we get better and be more of a participant in that world?
Jeff, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.